Estonia is a small European country in the Baltic. It has a population of 1.3 million and is a Finno-Ugric country like Finland and Hungary, which is why Estonian is such a notoriously difficult language to learn. Historically, Estonia has rarely enjoyed independence and was a flashpoint of conflict between various competing European powers. At one point Danish, then conquered by German crusaders, divided up between the Swedes and Poles, and eventually conquered by the Russians in 1710, who ruled Estonia for 200 years. Estonia gained independence in 1918, only to be invaded and conquered by the Soviet Union in 1939, which, after a brief Nazi occupation, was then reoccupied by the Soviets, resulting in 50 years of communist rule. During the 1989 European Spring, Estonia regained its independence. I could tell you more here, but there is an Estonian history YouTuber called Eastery who makes videos in English, and I'm going to instead direct those of you who have an interest in Baltic history to him. I'm here because in a previous video I mentioned the Estonian digital citizen reforms. These are something that I believe deserve their own video because I genuinely believe that the rest of Europe has a lot to learn from Estonia here and should copy them. This story begins right at the death of communism and the emergence of Estonia as an independent country. In the 1990s, the Estonians faced the fact that they lived under a Soviet-era behemoth bureaucracy of a state that was built around managing every aspect of people's lives. All countries that emerged from communist tyranny faced this bureaucratic behemoth, and each country chose different ways to deal with it. Cut down the behemoth, make the behemoth transparent, privatize the behemoth, or steal pieces of the behemoth and divide it up among yourself and your gangster friends. Everyone chose different things to do with that thing. The Estonians also took a unique path of what to do with the communist-era institutions of state. They decided to completely get rid of the entire damn thing and build a completely new Estonian state institution. Eventually, all Baltic states followed Estonia's example and did the same thing. This, by the way, is one of the biggest reasons why Baltic-Russian relations have been so bad since the early 2000s. The Russian government despises the fact that the Baltic states got rid of all legacy Soviet and Russian institutions, while at the same time many other former communist states look at the Baltics and ask themselves, maybe we should have done the same. Now, getting rid of your old state and building a completely new one, it sounds nice. It sounds like a great idea. It is something that sounds like it could be very popular to campaign on, which is why a lot of populists like to campaign on this promise. But keep in mind, doing something like this is very difficult and risky. Populists who campaign on this promise usually don't keep that promise or screw this up really badly. Many states have tried to completely scrap the old structures of state and build new ones in their stead, and only few succeeded, while most failed. And that is not surprising. Doing something as radical as this requires a functioning vision for a new state that actually works, and also having the backing of the entire society, meaning you can't be partisan about this. There are two reasons why Estonia succeeded. Estonian society at large saw the Soviet institutions as alien and colonial. To Estonians, the Soviet state was a constant reminder of oppression under communist tyranny, so the project to get rid of it had the support of the entire Estonian society across partisan lines. The other reason is that the death of communism happened to coincide with another revolution, the digital economy, and creating a digital society became the plan behind building this new Estonian state. The Estonians made a gamble in the 90s. They placed their bets on digitalization being the predominant factor in shaping society throughout the 21st century, and therefore decided on a complete digitalization of the Estonian state by 2030. And now, I might bore you because I'm going to go through all the Estonian digital state reforms to show you how they came to be. The first step became known as the Tiger Leap policy, in which the government paid for each school classroom to be equipped with a PC by 1997, paid for free courses on how to use PCs and basic tech literacy, and thereby intended to educate Estonian society into becoming the most tech literate in all of Europe. Now you may say, well, most schools in Europe have PCs in classrooms these days. There's nothing special about that anymore. True, but keep in mind that this is where Estonia started in the 1990s. Most of the rest of us at best started doing this in the late 2000s. Estonia has since the 1990s moved far further than that. If you want to get an idea of how deep the digitalization of the Estonian education sector has gone since then, preschoolers in Estonia are taught basic programming skills starting at the age of 7. Most school curriculums contain things like basic math skills, basic literacy, and basic civics. Estonia added basic tech to the list of things every child and teenager should be educated on in their society. And then going into the 2000s, Estonia embarked on implementing its most substantial reforms intended for building the world's first digital paperless state. Think about all the things that go into managing and maintaining a state. Documents, management and storage of those papers in archives and offices. A substantial amount of what makes a state is simple paperwork, and really has been such since the Chinese built the first state structures on paper bureaucracy systems 3,000 years ago. Estonia began replacing these, and we can map the Estonian reforms out in a timeline. In the year 2000, Estonia created the e-cabinet. All government work was from then on administered and managed digitally, without paper. Same year came the e-tax board. Filing your taxes and the collection of taxes was entirely digitalized. And the mobile parking system, at first managed via text message, where you requested parking space for your car in a system managed by computers. In 2001, Estonia launched X-Road. This is basically a gigantic state database for any and all data collected and used for administrative purposes by the state. Anything from your age to tax number began to be held in archives and offices digitally in state servers for easier access and more efficiency in administration. In 2002, Estonia launched the e-school, making computers available to all students in schools, replacing blackboards with large touchscreens, introducing a more thorough curriculum on tech, and digitalizing student curriculums and exams. Estonia also introduced the e-signature. Every Estonian citizen received a person-specific digital signature that allows them to do everything online that once required a handwritten signature on paper. With this, Estonia also introduced the digital ID, essentially a digital ID card available to all Estonians, which would become the foundation of even more substantial reforms in the coming years. In 2003, Estonia launched Eesti.ee, a site and later app that would serve as the central digital gateway to all transactions citizens would have with the state and its institutions. In 2004, Estonia launched a digital public transportation ticket. Purchased online, a digital ticket tied to your digital ID, which allowed you to use all public transport. 2005 saw two of the most important reforms. E-policing turned the Estonian police into a fully digitalized, paperless institution. All police paperwork was simplified and made digital. Every police officer is issued a service tablet connected to an Estonian police web service that stores any and all data a police officer could need access to in their line of work. But easily the bigger reform of that year was the introduction of e-voting. Combined with the central government site and app, the digital ID, and the digital signature system, Estonians were given the ability to vote online via the state app. This worked incredibly well. More Estonians voted as a result. It made voting far more easy. It eliminated voter fraud and ID issues. And since 2023, 51% of Estonians that vote this way. In 2006, Estonia introduced e-notary and e-justice. All notarizing activities and work were now digitalized. Anything from overseeing inheritance, listing assets to marriages and other procedural steps of the court now was done digitally without any paper or paper archives. The e-justice system made all procedures of the court and law completely paperless by 2016, creating a justice system interconnecting offices of prosecutors, defense attorneys and the police completely digitally. In 2007, digital ID was made mobile for phone users, and Estonia introduced a completely digital business registration system. Over the next years, it would be continuously updated as Estonia created the most easy system for opening businesses in all of Europe. Instead of mountains of paperwork that you would find in some countries, by 2011, opening a business in Estonia became as simple as doing a few clicks with your digital ID. In 2007, there was a Russian cyber attack on the Estonian digital infrastructure, to which Estonia responded by introducing the keyless signature infrastructure that keeps the Estonian digital state secure and protects the privacy of its participants. In 2008, Estonia introduced the e-healthcare system, digitalizing the entire public healthcare sector, making all health information digital and completely removing all paperwork in the health sector. In 2009, the digitalization of the healthcare sector was expanded by making all prescriptions for medications digital. In 2011, the management of the energy infrastructure was digitalized. In 2012, Estonia expanded on that by introducing a digitally managed electronic vehicle charging system, which made Estonia one of the most accessible countries for electric vehicles. In 2014, the bureaucracy of transportation infrastructure was digitalized. Road information, vehicle history, driving lessons, registry of driving licenses, management of repairs and more was now all completely managed and registered without paper. Additionally, Estonia introduced the e-residency. This was for foreigners who came to live in Estonia. After application and approval, foreign residents gained access to much of the digital infrastructure, with exceptions in obvious things like voting. The management of immigration policy was thereby also digitalized. Controversial in other European countries, Estonia also introduced the nomad visa. If you do not live in Estonia but want to benefit from the digital infrastructure and tax benefits of Estonia, you could now apply for the digital nomad visa. This allowed you to register your business as Estonian and have your transactions registered in Estonia, even though you may even spend most of your time not even living or working in Estonia. Many other Europeans criticize this and see it as a form of disguising tax evasion. 2015 brought one of the biggest reforms, e-accounting and e-tax. The entire Estonian taxation bureaucracy was digitalized and moved to digital online services. All receipts and bills in Estonia for any and all purchases are handed out and stored in a digital format. All your financial transactions are stored in personal servers. This allows Estonians to do their tax work with an ease unparalleled anywhere else in the world, with basically just 10 minutes of a few mouse clicks, while a computer calculates your taxes for you, no matter if you are a private employee, a small business owner, or a multi-million corporation. Combined with the digitalized business infrastructure, this is what made Estonia the most business-friendly country in Europe, and by 2022, the most business-friendly country in the world. In 2017, Estonia introduced the Data Embassy, basically arguing that digital data of Estonian citizens and the Estonian state should fall under diplomatic protection, and that how data is handled between states should be subject to its new rules of digital diplomacy. Here's where something else also started: declining relations with China, who oppose Estonia's push for international rules on the use of data. In cooperation with Luxembourg, Estonia built the first data embassy, in which Estonian data is stored under Estonian diplomatic protection in Luxembourg for mutual cooperation and exchange between those two countries in digital economy and infrastructure. In 2018, Estonia introduced the Proactive Government, basically an office dedicated to continuously improving the apps and services of the digital state, making them faster, more user-friendly, and easier to access with each new technological innovation. In 2019, Estonia introduced Reporting 3.0, an automated system of data collection specifically for customs services and businesses, intended to collect data as quickly as possible while still providing the privacy of its owners, to make the process of doing one's taxes even less burdensome and faster for anyone who runs a business. 2020 was a big year. Family benefits and services were digitalized. Remote verification was introduced for those using the e-notary, meaning you could now get married with a few mouse clicks. Then a strategic paper was outlined for the use of AI to make the digital state even more effective in the coming decades. Estonia had effectively already created the digital paperless state, so now Estonia introduced a new goal of creating what it called the invisible state. What is meant by this is that by 2030, through the lack of paper, the effectiveness of digital management, and the introduction of artificial intelligence in management of certain bureaucratic tasks, maintaining the state and providing its services should become so effective that the state becomes almost invisible and unnoticed in the daily lives of Estonians. And this is how far we are today in the list of Estonia's reforms, how Estonia got to where it is, and how it created the first paperless digital state. Today, the only thing you can't do digitally in Estonia, and where the state still forces you to physically do all the paperwork and appointments, is getting divorced, which I guess is something the churches insisted on. I really like Estonia's digital state, and if you are somewhat skeptical, I will present you with what is arguably the biggest selling point of this digital state: the Estonian tax rate. Estonians pay a 20% flat tax no matter what their income is. Yes, Estonians pay less taxes, not just than the rest of us in Europe, but even less than those Americans who constantly whine about how high our taxes supposedly are. Since 2022, Estonia is in fact #1 in the world in tax competitiveness, even better than some tax havens like Switzerland, Singapore, or Monaco. But interestingly, and this is the big selling point for the digital state, the Estonian tax rate is low not because Estonia is governed by libertarians or is some sort of libertarian country. No, Estonia has all the social services, including a public healthcare system and higher education system, that the rest of Europe has. What happened is that when Estonia built the digital paperless state, it turned out to be so much more cheaper and cost-effective than the paper bureaucracy state that Estonia simply no longer needed to collect the amount of taxes that would have been required to run a paper bureaucracy state. Faced with this welcome surprise, Estonia decided to substantially cut its taxes. Turning your state into a digital paperless state will allow you to cut taxes in half or even more. But you don't have to do so. You could also keep the taxes as they were and spend the surplus on something else, from infrastructure to better services to paying down your national debts. A digital state is initially an expensive investment that, however, comes with huge long-term benefits. There's in particular one country that I believe would benefit the most out of getting rid of its old institutions and constructing an Estonian-style paperless digital state: Greece. I am making this video in part for one reason. You have maybe noticed in recent years that there are a lot of articles and even videos out there by Europeans bemoaning that we lag so far behind the Americans in digital economy. There are even European politicians arguing that what we supposedly must do now is be more like California or Texas. There are, of course, those who think differently. Throughout the last year, some European leaders have been championing laws that try to force American tech companies to comply with European regulations. Using Ground News, I can see that the French news network France 24 writes positively about this, and that is somewhat interesting when you keep in mind that France is one of the biggest advocates for regulating the big American tech giants more strictly in Europe. Ground News, which is today's sponsor, is a great tool that provides me with the means to observe and compare how media coverage of news items varies across political fissures and national borders. With every story, Ground News offers a comprehensive breakdown of political bias, factuality, and ownership of the reporting sources, all supported by ratings from free independent news monitoring organizations. In the coverage, Ground News has analyzed 37 sources. Surprisingly, 43% of these sources show a left-leaning bias, whereas 37% show a center-leaning bias, and 20% show a right-leaning bias. It is interesting to me how right-leaning outlets barely seem to cover this news item at all. Through Ground News, I can see how right-leaning American outlets are largely critical of these regulations. Left-leaning American outlets support the European regulations, while the French media outlets praise the regulations even when they are right-wing. American coverage of European matters is certainly something interesting to keep an eye out in an American election year. The way that some politically affiliated American outlets write about Europe can say a lot about what they would like to see at home. You will, for example, notice that coverage of Viktor Orban in right-wing American media is increasing and also largely positive. I've been working with Ground News for a few years now because I trust that I'm getting the most balanced possible overview of how the news is covered and presented across different political positions and even across national and geopolitical boundaries. And using the European edition ensures I'm staying up to date on news that directly affects me. Which is why I can recommend that you all go to my link, ground.news/Kraut, to check them out for yourself. The link is also in my description, or scan my QR code. They're also giving my viewers 40% off their unlimited access Vantage plan, and I think they're worth it. Now, I will confess right up front to you, I always find suggestions that we should copy America suspicious. Probably because I'm in my 30s and remember the 2008 financial crisis. We Europeans mainly associate that crisis with the Greek debt crisis, but you should never forget that this crisis was a global crisis that basically blew the lid off all financial mismanagement in Europe. And the primary centers of financial mismanagement in Europe were not just Greece, but also Italy, Spain, Portugal, and Ireland. And in all of these countries, the crisis happened for different reasons. And on this topic, Spain is very relevant to us. Because unlike Greece, the main cause for the crisis in Spain was not government mismanagement, budget mismanagement, or failed tax systems, but the private banking sector. Throughout the 1990s and 2000s, private sector banks claimed that they were copying California and essentially building the California of Europe in Spain. They made massive promises of how there would be mass migrations of Europeans to Spain, how Spain would become the center of European tech industry, how Spain would become the center of European entertainment industries, how Spain would become the Hollywood of Europe, how Spain would become the center of European agriculture, and all sorts of lofty promises. And many people believed them. Many Europeans invested their money into these promises. The Spanish banking sector also jumped fully on board, and Spanish governments eventually also fell for it. 2008 blew the lid off and revealed those promises were empty. The money that was invested was actually burnt and wasted on utterly useless projects. most infamous of which was the Ciudad Airport, an international airport built in the middle of a dry plain for a town with a population of 60,000 in one of the least populated regions of Spain. Maybe I am just biased by remembering that experience, but one thing I believe we Europeans should learn, specifically from the financial crisis in Spain from 2008 to 2012, is that we should be suspicious of any and all promises by politicians and businesses of copying America and Europe. And sure, the Americans are good in innovative entrepreneurship. It plays to their strengths. But do not forget what we Europeans are good at. We invented the modern state. We invented modern bureaucracy. We invented modern public services. We invented the welfare state. And we are just really good at administration. Only the Singaporeans and Japanese are better than us in that. And what are the Singaporeans doing? Well, they are building deeper diplomatic relations with Estonia because Singapore noticed the benefits of a digital state and is now working with Estonia to build its own digital state. I believe that instead of pursuing empty promises of creating the Silicon Valley, Texas, or Las Vegas of Europe, we should instead focus on policy ideas that play to our strengths. And our strengths are in state building. And in this regard, I believe Europeans should focus on building the digital state. With Estonia, we already have a template of how to do this, just as we also see the benefits of doing this. And as the Estonian example shows, a digital state would allow us to reduce the European tax burden in the long term, which is the main thing those who argue we should copy America always argue for. Don't forget that Estonia is not alone in digitalizing its state and that there are competing and even somewhat sinister alternatives. While Estonia is building the digital democracy, China is currently building the digital tyranny. A reason why Estonia and China have such bad diplomatic relations is in part that Estonia's vision of a transparent and effective digital state built on principles of protecting privacy and business while providing public services goes straight against the Chinese vision of a mass surveillance digital tyranny built on social credit scores. Russia has launched several cyber attacks against Estonia starting in 2007 because to the Russian kleptocracy, the Estonian digital state, built around empowering a public and involving it more actively in the political process, is somewhat of a nightmare, especially so close to its borders. Let's also not forget that Estonia's digital state is already being copied in Latvia, in Lithuania, and recently also in Poland and the Czech Republic. I mentioned in previous videos that I believe the Western European attitude of seeing former communist states as backward is very misguided, and that there is in fact a lot for us to learn there. I would pick Estonia's digital paperless state as one of the prime examples of something we should emulate more, especially in a country like Germany, where more than half of German businesses still use fax machines. So, rather than falling for another empty proposal to copy California, let's instead play to our strengths and try to be more like Estonia.